Guardians of the Galaxy was a flarking good time, but will it lead to buyer's remorse? Let's find out. Hey, I'm Sam with Busy Dad Gaming. I help busy dads with all things Xbox so they can relax and go back to their families recharged. I want you to think back, when was the last time you finished or beat a game, and did you even have the time to actually beat it? That's one of the main questions that ends up coming up, especially when I'm playing a story-driven game, is will my time actually be worth that investment? Now, having played Guardians of the Galaxy, I beat it in about 18 hours and I played it through on the Series X. I did not 100% this game. Primarily, there are a lot of collectibles, and I just did not have time to dig through and find all of them, so I didn't bother to do that. But let's also get this right out of the way, is that you're going to compare this particular group of characters to their MCU counterparts. Now, they will start to distance themselves over the course of this game because you have more time with them, but that is just something that you're going to keep in mind. Now, also, as I mentioned, I did play this on a Series X in performance mode, and I'll get into the different performance or different modes here in a moment, but the other thing is on the Series S, it is at 1080p at 30 Hz, and it does not have any other options, so take that as it may, but let's go ahead and dive into the review and see how good or bad Guardians of the Galaxy was. Now, to dive right into the story, this review will be spoiler free, but if you're familiar with the comics or a good chunk of the backstories, a lot of this will just end up being extra content for you. But overall, I did feel that the story was awesome and I was thoroughly engaged pretty much the entire time. It does start off fairly small stakes, and over the course of the game, you start to actually really take on that namesake of the Guardians of the Galaxy. As you're playing through this game, you will hear a lot of banter between the characters, and a lot of it is really funny, but it also starts to give you insights into the characters' different backgrounds. So in between missions, you can actually start to talk to the different characters and start to get even more of their backstories. You can find different collectibles that also contribute to that. So as you're playing through this game, you'll end up getting all the different stories via all these different ways, and it is pretty cool. Now, to me and how I saw things, this story really is about grief and how it has the potential to consume us and take us down a very dark path. Now, although your choices don't really affect the ending, your choices across the game and different decisions will end up impacting how those final missions actually play out. So personally speaking, a ton of accolades for the story. I really enjoyed it. It was one of the primary reasons I actually finished this game. Now to dive into the graphics, and the graphics overall do look pretty good in this game. I spent, as I mentioned, most of my time playing in performance mode, so I could have that 60 hertz frame rate. There are a quality mode and a ray tracing mode, both of which are capped at 30 hertz, and they did look good, don't get me wrong, but the decrease in frame rate was something I just could not get over. Now, I am not a graphic expert, I am not Digital Foundry, so I'm going to approach this more in the vein of I'm not an expert, but going down in frame rates was really jarring for me, especially when you move into the quality and the ray tracing modes. They do look fantastic, especially when you're sitting there in static images and you're just kind of looking around. But for me personally, performance mode, getting that 60 hertz, that was really what ended up, making my gameplay worth it. You can also change the graphical settings at any time without having the game reload, which I really did appreciate. Now, a couple of the good things when it came to the graphics, as I mentioned, performance mode looked and ran really well most of the time, and I'll get into why it didn't here in a moment. The ray tracing mode did look really good, and those reflections after the update also looked really good. The particle effects after the update also looked really good. The graphics in this game, as I mentioned, they look really good. They're not like, RTX 3080 quality type of graphics. I mean, I was playing this on a Series X, but overall, the graphics did look really good in this game, and the facial animations generally did also look really good, especially when you're looking at Rocket in his cinematics and you see the fur. That also looked really cool. Now, it is not all highlights when it comes to the overall graphics. Now, especially in the latter half of this game, it was very difficult to get through, but during some of the fights, the frame rate would just plummet. You would sit there and you'd be like sub 30 hertz, and it can be very jarring when you're going from 60 frames per second down below 30. Now, it would end up lasting the entire fight, after which time it would go back to normal sometimes, but this was very apparent during a mission where you're in a cave and there's a ton of fog. You get in a fight and it would just, the frame rate would just chug. And then afterwards, it wouldn't go back all the way up to 60, but it would end up going down like between the 30-40 range. It was just really weird. I also ran into quite a few frame stutters during cutscenes, which was kind of a struggle, especially in the latter half of the game. There was also during the final mission, I really struggled on the frame rate to get through that one, and nothing Nothing I did fixed it, so I'm just guessing it was the game itself. And this happened, I tried it on the Series S just to make sure, and I ran into the exact same issue. There was just a lot of frame rate issues on that final mission. So not sure exactly what was causing that particular issue, but there's definitely room for improvement and improving the overall performance of this game. And that brings us to gameplay. And I'm going to put this right in the middle because it's not bad, but it's not really good either. It's just meh. The fighting is overall very simplistic, and there's a Gears of War style way to keep your guns from overheating when you're reloading. There's a team mechanic when you can use into, using different skills from different characters, and there's even a huddle mechanic if you're starting to get mowed down that it can kind of turn the tide of war and give your players a bunch of different buffs. Overall, there's not a ton to the overall gameplay in this particular perspective, especially when it comes to the fighting in it. There is exploration when you're not in battles, and it has a very on rails kind of feeling to it, and each team member has its own way of helping you through some of the traversal. Like Gru can go ahead and build bridges, Gamora can go ahead and help you hit high ledges, Drax just mows things down because he's super buff. It just kind of depends, but each team member does offer contributions as you're going through and doing a lot of the exploration pieces. Overall, the banter is really what sells some of these downtimes, especially when you're not in battle. So overall, when it came to gameplay, pew 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 pew. Now that brings me to the progression system, and there are upgrades that you can do for Peter, things like more shields, more health, fire faster, so on and so forth. But there are skill points that you can attribute to different characters to improve the different things that you can do during battle. It's just there, honestly, the upgrade system. This isn't an RPG, so don't expect a ton of things to greatly impact your gameplay. But overall, the gameplay is just there. It gets you from one set piece to another. But overall, like I mentioned before, it was really the story that was driving me forward. And the gameplay was just kind of a mechanism to get me between those different story beats. And that brings me to sound. And there are some good and bad in here. So
I swear! So, let's take that sprint-neck soldier outfit!
When it comes to the good, the soundtrack is awesome. I absolutely loved it. It has a lot of 80s music in it. The voice work is really, really well done. And just over those 18 hours of time, I totally forgot their MCU counterparts. And this game ended up becoming what I contribute Guardians of the Galaxy and what the voices are for it. Amazing voice work when it comes to this game. And aside from that, the sound was just okay. I mean, guns, make pew 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 sounds. You can hear different traversal sounds. Overall, I'll get into some of the bad things because there is a decent amount when it comes to the sound. But overall, the sound was just okay. But the voice work and the soundtrack, purely amazing. And that brings me to the bad areas of the sound, because there were quite a few bugs when it came to this, and I'm not exactly sure why. This is something I've started to see pop up in recent games where audio just ends up being a huge issue. In this particular game, you would end up going into areas and there wouldn't be any sound. Just nothing. Or you would go into a particular area and you would hear nothing but ambient sound. And characters are sitting there talking. You can see their lips moving, but nothing's happening. You could fire your guns. Nothing's happening. So it was kind of weird. There's also an issue where you would go into cutscenes and there would be no voices. So you have cutscenes and there's literally no sound going on. You also had another issue where it was happening, but it was delayed. And so things weren't syncing up properly. A decent amount of issues when it came to the sound and the overall frame rate. Definitely areas of improvement from just an overall performance standpoint. And that brings me to Quick Resume. This game does support Quick Resume, and I really did enjoy being able to put this game down, pick it back up, go right after where I was leaving off. Now, it did potentially come with some issues. I couldn't verify or confirm some of these things, but sometimes I would jump back into from Quick Resume and the game wouldn't work properly. So I'd go ahead and quit out of the game, quit out of Quick Resume, restart it up. Sometimes that would work, sometimes it wouldn't. But that kind of leads me into the bugs that I've been, experiencing with this game. So you had the performance issues, which is the frame rate stuff. You also had the sound issues. You also had where sometimes the interaction buttons just wouldn't show up, and so you had no clue what the hell to do. So again, you'd end up having to reload a checkpoint. Sometimes you'd end up losing progress, sometimes you wouldn't. It just depends. Sometimes you would end up, this was a really weird one. I loaded into a particular area and it was nothing but shades of blue. Why? As you can tell, there's frame rate issues, there's sound issues, there's some graphical issues that aren't, related to performance, and just This game really could use some polish in that particular regard, especially in the latter half of this game. That was a real struggle to make it through. If it weren't for the story, I probably wouldn't have finished this game, personally speaking, but that leads me to a dad's perspective. And is this game really worth your time or money? And I still have buyer's remorse when it comes to Ratchet and Clank. I ended up spending $70 on that game. On average, you end up getting it between 15 and 20 hours to beat that game. And I did not feel that the price point was worth the game that I actually got for it. Here with Guardians of the Galaxy, again, you're looking at around 18 hours for my playthrough, and I took my time, so it was probably between 15 and 20 hours for this game. And I personally picked it up for half price, so I got it for about $30, which in my personal opinion, totally worth it. The story alone is worth playing through this game. The harder question to answer is, would I pay full price for this game? Now, to be perfectly blunt, no, I wouldn't pay full price for this game. It has too many issues. The story isn't personally long enough to warrant that kind of investment of money. And just overall full retail price, I couldn't suggest for this particular game. It does have some replay value, but not for me. So it does come with Game Plus option. So if you want to mow things down after you have all your upgrades, cool. According to Eidos Montreal, there will be 0 DLC for this game. So it is a standalone game. Take that as it may. And if you really love the game, you can replay it. If you don't, then it's going to be a one and done like it was for me. So again, for me personally, I wouldn't pay full price for this game, but $30, maybe $40, definitely worth playing through this game for the story alone. Now in the comments below, let me know what your experience has been with Guardians of the Galaxy and what you thought of the story. And if you're unsure about what to play next on Game Pass, make sure to check out my video on the top 5 games to play on Game Pass, and I'll see you out there.